I want him punished for what he did to me, because I honestly feel he's taken 20 years of my life away.
Now, a victim of the serial rapist David Carrick has told Sky News he used his job as a firearms officer to gain her trust before subjecting her to months of physical and mental abuse, telling her the safest place you can be is with me. Now, Carrick was formally discharged from the Metropolitan Police earlier today, and Sky News has obtained footage filmed by Carrick as he walked around his home in which he attacked many of his victims.
David Carrick, a name that once stood for authority, protection, and trust within the Metropolitan Police, was arrested on a seemingly ordinary October day in 2021. But the arrest itself was just the beginning of an even darker story. What followed wasn't just the end of his career as a police officer, it was the shocking revelation of a man who, for nearly 2 decades, used the very badge that was meant to protect the public to hide a trail of horror and abuse. But Carrick wasn't an ordinary officer. He had been assigned to protect some of the most powerful people in the country, guarding diplomats, ministers, and the halls of the British Parliament itself. But behind that uniform, he manipulated women, exploited his position, and committed heinous crimes, all while hiding in plain sight. Now, as we peel back the layers of his past, we begin to understand the terrifying reality of his actions and the disturbing extent of the damage he caused. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more, thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse, glorify, or condone any of the criminal actions or individuals described in this case. Viewer discretion is advised. David Carrick was born on January 4th, 1975 in Salisbury, England, into a family that was shaped by the complexities of military life. His father, a veteran of the armed forces, had a significant influence on the family's dynamic. Because of his father's service, the family moved frequently, living on different army bases across the country. This environment, though structured, was anything but stable. David's father was described as a heavy drinker, and it was here that the foundation for a troubled upbringing began to form. According to David, his father wasn't just a source of instability, he was abusive. David would later claim that the abuse was both physical and emotional, a dark aspect of his childhood that seemed to shape his view of authority and power. However, David's mother, Jean, denied these allegations, maintaining that their family life was normal and that David's memories of these experiences might have been exaggerated over time. But the difficulties didn't stop there. As David entered his teenage years, the family dynamic became even more complicated. His mother remarried, and with that came a new figure in David's life, his stepfather. David again claimed that he was subjected to abuse by this new man in his life. He said that his stepfather's treatment of him was harsh, possibly even more damaging than what he had endured from his biological father. Yet, once again, David's mother denied these accusations, insisting that David's relationship with his stepfather was no different from that of any other teenager. Despite these turbulent family relationships, David's outward life seemed to offer more promise. His mother described him as normal. He did well in school, participated actively in sports, and was considered a charming and popular figure among his peers. David had a natural talent for athletics, and he found a particular passion in martial arts. By the time he was a teenager, he had earned a black belt in Taekwondo, and his family would often attend tournaments to watch him compete. David was athletic, disciplined, and competitive, traits that his friends and family admired. One of his old schoolmates even recalled how cool David was at school, saying he was the kind of guy who had no trouble making friends and was highly sought after by girls. His social life seemed to match his athletic achievements. As David navigated through adolescence, he quickly gained a reputation as a charming young man who was good at everything he tried. This popularity among his peers, especially with girls, made him feel even more powerful, reinforcing a sense of superiority that would later become dangerous. At just 14 years old, David Carrick's life would shift dramatically after a serious allegation made by his mother. The details of the incident remain unclear, but the accusation pointed to a potential sexual assault, something that would eventually be reported to the police. However, no charges followed, and the case was left without further legal action. Despite this, the event left a deep mark on David. According to him, this was the turning point. The incident changed his behavior. It wasn't an immediate change, but over time, David became more withdrawn, retreating from his family and the relationships he once held close. Then, there were the troubling allegations from David's younger half-brother. On several occasions, David would kick him, causing serious injuries. Then, at the age of 19, David Carrick took a significant step in his life by joining the British Army. It wasn't just a desire to serve his country that drew him in, but rather a yearning for adventure. According to his mother, David's motivations were driven by the prospect of traveling and, perhaps more tellingly, the allure of having a weapon, a gun. This desire for power and control, even at such a young age, would later become a central theme in his life. He was initially posted to the Gloucestershire, Berkshire, and Wiltshire Regiment, where he would begin his military career, showing promise as a soldier. However, in 1997, David's path took another turn. He transferred to the Royal Logistics Corps, a decision that seemed to solidify his commitment to the military. This move marked a further deepening of his involvement, as he remained in the Army for several more years, adapting to the structured life of a soldier and gaining more responsibility with each passing year. On the surface, it seemed like he was building a solid career, but in reality, his motivations were still steeped in a desire for dominance and control. The Army, with its strict hierarchy and access to weapons, was an environment where David could feed into this craving for power. Yet, by 2000, just a few years into his military career, David made the decision to leave the Army. The reasons for his departure were unclear, and no formal disciplinary actions were recorded. However, this decision to leave the Army was followed by a series of troubling incidents that would raise red flags for those who knew him. In the year 2000, David found himself at the center of two significant allegations. The first was a report of malicious communications towards a partner, a case that pointed to an unhealthy and manipulative relationship. The second was a burglary accusation, one that, much like the earlier allegations in his youth, would go unaddressed by the authorities. These two early instances were the second major record of troubling behavior, but despite being reported to the police, no charges were filed and no criminal action was taken. Then, in August 2001, at the age of 26, David Carrick walked into the Metropolitan Police Service, wearing a uniform that represented trust, integrity, and public duty. Despite his troubling past and the unresolved allegations that had shadowed his teenage years and early adulthood, he was accepted into one of the most respected institutions in the United Kingdom. At the beginning of his career, David worked as a response officer in Merton, southwest London. His role required him to respond to emergencies, calm tense situations, and reassure the community. On the surface, he appeared to be effective. He earned the trust of both his colleagues and the public, presenting himself as reliable, competent, and dependable. But underneath that facade, the darker aspects of his character continued to exist, hidden from the eyes of his peers. As the years went by, David built a reputation for reliability, and his career began to advance. In 2009, he achieved a significant promotion when he was transferred into the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, a highly specialized unit responsible for protecting government buildings, embassies, and senior political figures. This was a position of prestige and enormous responsibility, and it brought him closer to the heart of British power. He carried firearms, stood guard at embassies, and was trusted to protect some of the most recognizable faces in politics. Among those he was tasked to protect was Boris Johnson, who at the time was the mayor of London. What made this rise in his career even more disturbing was how easily he blended in. And yet, those who interacted with him on a personal level, particularly women, began to see glimpses of the real David Carrick. His charm, his position, and his confidence drew them in, but the uniform and the badge also gave him an aura of untouchable authority. It was here, in the very early stages of his police career, that the dangerous pattern began to take root. David realized that the same uniform that made him look like a hero to the public also gave him the perfect disguise for his manipulation and cruelty. David Carrick's descent into terror began almost immediately after he joined the Metropolitan Police. The victims would eventually be known, but their stories were not heard for years. According to legal records, there are 12 victims whose cases were officially documented, but many others, too afraid or too silenced, likely went unreported. For the sake of clarity, these victims will be referred to by letters in the records, though their experiences were all too real, and the pain they endured was unimaginable. David's first known assault, which set the stage for everything that followed, occurred in 2003, just 2 years after he became a police officer. His first victim, referred to here as T, was a 20-year-old woman he met at a bar. What seemed like an innocent invitation turned into a horrifying ordeal. The two exchanged pleasantries, and David, ever the charming officer, invited her to a housewarming party. But there was no party. When T arrived at his flat, confusion quickly turned into dread. The door closed behind her, and the moment she stepped inside, everything changed. The housewarming party was a ruse, an excuse to lure T into a situation where he could carry out his horrifying plans. David held her captive in his flat for hours. He threatened her with a replica gun, making her believe her life was in danger. He used violence to overpower her, inflicting repeated sexual assault. T's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as David showed no sign of stopping. When he was finally done, he allowed her to leave, but the damage had been done. T went straight to A&E, bloodied and bruised, seeking medical help. But instead of compassion, she received something far worse. The nurse who treated her made a chilling remark. She told T that the perpetrator was a police officer, and in her words, it was unlikely that any action would be taken. This was the first time that David's abuse was dismissed, but it wouldn't be the last. And David Carrick's ability to manipulate and control continued. Just a year later, in 2004, he met M, a fellow officer, and began a flirtation that seemed harmless enough at first. What started as casual banter soon escalated when David, ever the predator, pushed the boundaries. He invited M to his flat, and what was supposed to be a consensual encounter soon turned violent. M, a fellow police officer, objected when David attempted to force himself upon her, but he ignored her pleas. It was the same pattern: the disregard for consent, the manipulation of power, and the unrelenting belief that no one would challenge him. M, like T, found herself trapped in a situation that got out of her control. The aftermath of the assault was devastating for M. Not only did she have to contend with the trauma of the assault itself, but the shame of being attacked by a fellow officer. She kept silent, burying her pain for years, unable to come forward. But something happened the following year that could have changed everything. In 2005, David Carrick completed mandatory domestic abuse training as part of his ongoing professional development within the Metropolitan Police. This training was supposed to equip officers with the necessary skills to recognize the signs of domestic violence and to support victims effectively. It focused on identifying patterns of abusive behavior, understanding the psychological toll on victims, and, most importantly, how to respond with compassion and support. However, for David, this was far from the turning point it should have been. Instead of using what he'd learned to reflect on his own actions, the training seemed to have no impact on him, and the following years, he would only get worse. By 2008, David Carrick was 33 years old when he began a relationship with F, a 20-year-old woman who would later go on to become a police officer herself. The age gap was significant, but Carrick's charm and his position in law enforcement drew her in. At first, the relationship seemed serious. He was her first real partner, and they even purchased a 2-story home together. But behind closed doors, what started as affection quickly descended into systematic abuse. Carrick isolated F from her friends and family, making her feel trapped and powerless. In one terrifying moment, he grabbed a knife and began slashing her police work shirts. It wasn't just an act of destruction. It was a calculated move to intimidate her, to threaten her professional life, and to make her believe that if she ever exposed him, he could ruin her completely. F later admitted she felt she had no way out. She believed no one would believe her, not even her colleagues, because Carrick was a fellow officer. Outside of their home, Carrick also showed his darker side in public. Friends later recalled how heavily he drank and how he became aggressive when he did. He started arguments in bars, flashed his police identification to intimidate people, and made it clear he enjoyed the power his position gave him. He was not just an abuser behind closed doors. He was a bully in every arena of his life. The following year, 2009, Carrick's pattern continued when he met S at a martial arts class. At first, he used the same charm and confidence that had lured in so many others. After a night of socializing and drinking, S agreed to go back to his home. She expected a consensual encounter, but once they were alone, Carrick's demeanor shifted. He became aggressive, rushing her, pinning her to the bed, and forcing himself on her despite her protests. When she resisted, Carrick's anger only deepened. He attempted to penetrate her, but when he couldn't perform, his frustration turned into rage. From that night on, whenever Carrick saw her in public, he hurled abuse at her, shouting insults and humiliating her. For S, the assault was compounded by harassment that never seemed to stop. Yet, like others before her, she felt trapped in silence. Reporting him felt impossible. He was a police officer, and she believed that no one would take her word against his. Not long after, Carrick targeted another woman, D, whom he met during a night out. They shared drinks, and when she became emotional, Carrick positioned himself as a comforting friend. But once again, his true nature emerged. Instead of ensuring she got home safely, he manipulated her into going back to his flat. D made it clear she was not interested in a casual relationship, but Carrick ignored her boundaries. Once they were alone, he stripped and forced his fingers inside her, showing the same disregard for consent he had displayed before. Then, in 2009, David attended his school reunion, a night that would unknowingly set the stage for his next act of violence. There, he reconnected with N, a married woman he had known from his past. After spending time socializing, David convinced her to share a bed with him, as they had once been friends. At the time, N believed that sharing a bed was a harmless act. She saw no reason to doubt him, especially as he was a police officer and seemed trustworthy. But what was supposed to be a friendly gesture quickly turned disturbing. As N lay in bed, expecting to sleep, David began to make advances on her. She recoiled in horror and denied him access, but David didn't stop. Instead, he became increasingly aggressive. He grabbed her and dragged her back to his bed, whispering in her ear, "This will be our little secret." What followed was an assault that left N feeling both physically and emotionally violated. David forced himself upon her in a way that demonstrated the full extent of his manipulative nature. And then, as time passed, David's confidence grew. By 2015, he was well aware of the power his badge afforded him, and he wielded it with increasing arrogance. He reconnected with Kay, a woman he had known years earlier. David used his charm and his status in the police force to lure Kay into a brief but violent relationship. At first, Kay believed that she had met a trustworthy man, someone who had been kind to her, but things quickly escalated. David's true nature soon emerged. What started as a consensual encounter turned into a violent assault when David ignored Kay's objections. Despite her attempts to stop him, David disregarded her pleas and subjected her to excruciating pain. But even though Kay had experienced this horrifying abuse, the fear of reporting a police officer, especially one of David's stature, kept her from speaking out. David, however, was not finished, and as time passed, he would find his next victim. In 2016, David's web of manipulation and control ensnared B, a woman who had recently come out of an unhappy marriage. Vulnerable and seeking stability, B met David, and once again, he used his charm to draw her in. They began a relationship, and David quickly convinced her to move in with him. He even reassured her by offering to pay her £1,000 a month, further cementing his control over her. B was vulnerable, and David knew exactly how to exploit that. David's control soon extended far beyond financial manipulation. He isolated B from her family and friends, systematically cutting off her support system to make her more dependent on him. He even went so far as to monitor her when she worked from home, installing cameras in their shared living space. The constant surveillance was just one tool in his arsenal of intimidation. Then, David forced B to have sex shortly after she had undergone surgery to remove hemorrhoids. Despite her protests and the pain she was in, David pushed forward, showing no regard for her suffering. It wasn't just physical violence. He humiliated her in front of her daughter, leaving the child to overhear some of the assaults. The trauma B experienced was not just personal, it was now impacting her family too. As the months passed, B became a shell of the person she once was, yet, despite the devastation, B feared speaking out. She was aware of David's position within the police force and knew that her complaints would likely go unheard. So, she remained trapped as the years rolled on, with David's manipulative grip tightening. By 2017, David Carrick's confidence as a predator had reached terrifying new heights. That year, he met Jay while socializing, and at first, he drew her in with the same charm and authority that had deceived so many women before her. She saw a police officer, someone respectable, and someone she could trust. But within months, that illusion collapsed, and Carrick had gained near total control over her life. He dictated what she wore, who she spoke to, and even what she ate. He insulted her constantly, reducing her self-esteem until she no longer recognized herself. And because he always reminded her that he was the police, she lived in the crushing fear that no one would believe her word over his. But Carrick didn't stop at psychological control. He weaponized his job to terrify her. He sent her pictures of his firearm from work, attaching messages like, "Remember, I'm the boss." He used his police baton to threaten her. And when she resisted, he escalated further, handcuffing her, whipping her, and even locking her naked in a cupboard under the stairs for hours. Sometimes she suffered panic attacks in the dark, begging to be released, but he ignored her cries and taunted her from the other side of the door, whistling as if it were a game. Jay endured repeated sexual assaults so violent that she often bled afterwards. On one occasion, while they were on holiday, Carrick attacked her inside a tent. He forced himself on her while her parents slept just meters away in the next tent. To silence her, he covered her mouth, leaving her unable to call for help, even as her father grew suspicious and came to check. Carrick humiliated Jay in degrading ways, forcing her to endure acts that stripped away her dignity, even urinating on her as a form of control. The emotional scars became unbearable, and the trauma seeped into every aspect of her life. For nearly 2 years, she lived under his rule, believing escape was impossible. Yet when she finally broke free, she carried with her the whip Carrick had once used against her, determined to ensure that no other woman would suffer as she had. Even while absing Jay, Carrick was already hunting for more victims. His appetite for domination had grown insatiable, and between 2018 and 2019, 2 more women, W and P, fell into his trap. W was a cleaner who had agreed to work for him. Carrick reassured her by saying he was a police officer, even claiming to have run background checks on her. This display of authority made her feel like she had nothing to fear. But one day, as she cleaned his shower, Carrick stripped naked, cornered her, and assaulted her in a degrading way. W was left shaken and powerless, realizing that her supposed client, a man who should have represented safety, had turned her workplace into a crime scene. At the same time, Carrick targeted P, a vulnerable woman who struggled with learning difficulties and mental health issues. He pretended to be charming at first, making her feel wanted, but when alcohol loosened his mask, his cruelty exploded. He began referring to her as his slave, a term he used to strip away her humanity and remind her of her place beneath him. Carrick's assaults on P were relentless and sadistic. He forced oral sex on her until she vomited, an act that seemed to excite him. He urinated on her body and into her mouth, reducing her to an object of humiliation. On other occasions, he inserted large objects inside her, inflicting severe pain, then shoved her into the shower to continue his acts. Like J and W before her, P felt trapped. Carrick's police badge wasn't just a shield for his crimes, it was a weapon, convincing his victims that they had no chance of being believed if they dared to speak. By early 2020, David Carrick had already left a trail of broken lives behind him, yet he showed no sign of slowing down. That February, he met F, a woman who had recently moved to the UK. She saw him as respectable, safe, and dependable, because once again, Carrick leaned on the authority of his badge. But as soon as she moved in with him, the reality of who he was became terrifyingly clear. Carrick turned aggressive, and he reminded her constantly that her immigration status made her vulnerable. He threatened to report her to authorities if she disobeyed him, using fear as another weapon of control. Then the assaults began. The first time he attacked her, she cried out in pain and begged him to stop, but Carrick ignored her pleas, leaving her injured and bleeding, while dismissing her suffering as if she were exaggerating. Over and over, he forced himself on her, overpowering her resistance, degrading her further with acts meant not only to hurt, but to humiliate. Like so many before her, F was subjected to oral assaults that left her sick and terrified, while Carrick urinated on her body as though her dignity meant nothing. By July of 2020, she finally broke free, but her ordeal would become pivotal because she joined the small circle of women who later stood in court to testify against him. She became one of the 12 known victims whose voices cut through decades of silence. The moment that finally shattered Carrick's double life came in October 2021. A new allegation, this time unrelated to the known victims, was reported, and the police were forced to act. When officers arrived at his home, body cam footage recorded the arrest of one of the Metropolitan Police's own firearms officers.
These are the necessities that I've just explained to you.
No necessities. What I keep going.
Well, that's one of three, one of four. So, okay. Well, allow you to get some clothes.
What is it you're searching for?
Articles relating to the offences
in St Albans.
In 2020. This is the allegation that's been made to us. Okay, sir.
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
So I've only been a police officer for 20 years.
Right, David.
Do you want me to come naked like this?
No, just understand you're under arrest.
I know
okay.
I'm under
just
arrest.
explain to us what do you need.
I'll pull out like this. Don't worry about it.
Can one of my colleagues go and get you stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you wanna? Yeah.
Which one's yours?
The arrest made headlines instantly. The idea that a serving officer had been accused of such crimes sparked outrage, and it gave many of his former victims the courage to finally come forward. The trial became a turning point, not only for Carrick's victims, but also for the Metropolitan Police and the public's trust in it.
In many ways, this is a story of the strength of 12 women.
Okay.
When this arrest made the news in 2021, those impacted started to come forward.
Stand up, David Carrick.
His name, the one name stated clearly. The names of the women he attacked, out of legal necessity for their own protection, became letters of the alphabet. But Justice Chima Grubb made it clear that these women are not to be diminished.
These women are not weak or ineffectual. They were victims of your criminal mindset. The malign influence of men like you in positions of power stands in the way of a revolution of women's dignity.
During her sentencing, the judge described how David Carrick took monstrous advantage of women. In stomach-churning detail, she spoke of the crimes that he committed against 12 women over a 17-year period. They include rape, false imprisonment, indecent assault, attempted rape, coercive and controlling behaviour, and so much more. To Stevenage, where he lived. His home, now a map of his crimes. He'd stand and whistle outside this cupboard, after locking a woman inside, naked. This whip, a weapon that left welts on one survivor. When she escaped, she took it with her to stop him from harming other women. And he set cameras up to monitor his targets, watching their every move from wherever he was.
Prosecutors painted a picture of sustained, calculated actions. They detailed how Carrick had used his badge to terrify women into silence, how he had assaulted them while laughing at their fear, and how he had manipulated the system to remain untouchable. Inside the courtroom, Carrick offered little. He claimed a difficult childhood, but it did nothing to explain away years of deliberate cruelty. At one point, after an apparent suicide attempt, he was assessed for psychiatric issues. Doctors concluded he was not mentally ill. His violence was not born of illness or confusion. It was the product of entitlement, power, and control. In the end, the verdict was clear. The jury heard the stories, weighed the evidence, and found Carrick guilty of some of the most appalling offenses ever committed by a serving officer in modern British history. And as the judge prepared to hand down one of the rarest sentences in the UK, a whole life order, the full scale of Carrick's betrayal came into focus. In February 2023, David Carrick finally faced the full weight of the law. After nearly 2 decades of abuse, manipulation, and violence, he was handed 36 life sentences for a staggering 49 offenses, including multiple rapes, assaults, and acts of coercive control.
I've made ancillary orders for deprivation pursuant to Section 153 of the Sentencing Act 2020 and restraining orders under Sections 359 and 360 of the Act. They will remain in force until further order. The victim surcharge applies. I make no sexual harm prevention orders given the nature of the sentence I am about to pass. On the main indictment on counts 16, 19, 29, 30, 31, 32, 38, 39, 42 and 43, the sentence is 4 years imprisonment on each concurrent. On counts 24 and 25, the sentence is 7 years on each concurrent. On count 6, on the second indictment, I impose a concurrent determinate sentence of 9 years. 31 sentences of life imprisonment are imposed on the main indictment on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, 26, 27, 28, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 40 and 41. Also, 5 life sentences are imposed on the second indictment on counts 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. This makes a total of 36 life sentences. The minimum term you will have to serve before the parole board can think of releasing you is 30 years.
The judge imposed a minimum term of 30 years, a sentence so severe it placed Carrick among the most dangerous offenders in modern British criminal history. His crimes were described in court as a campaign of rape and degradation, carried out with planning, cruelty, and an almost chilling lack of remorse.
Home, you'd reasonably assess a private place for personal matters. But it begs the question, doesn't it? When you sign up to become a police officer, you sign up to a certain set of values and standards, a code of conduct that applies both on and off duty. And if David Carrick didn't have that compass to begin with, how did he end up serving within the ranks of a police force? So what next? How much more of a knock can public trust take? In 2005, Carrick did a police training course on domestic abuse. By that point, he'd been in the force 4 years and raped multiple women undetected. His timeline exposes many missed opportunities.
He should not have been a police officer. There were many signs that we should have joined together. He should have been rooted out during his career as a police officer.
But he wasn't. Again today, the Commissioner promised change. And the Home Secretary said she looks forward to the findings of an inquiry into Carrick's behaviour, which is also looking into Sarah Everard's murder.
I believe we actually need a royal commission to decide the future of policing, because the system is so rotten, public trust has fallen so far that tinkering around the edges is not going to cut it.
The details of Carrick's attacks are so violent, his cruelty deeply upsetting. He'll serve a minimum of 30 years in prison. And a final message for the women.
The court salutes the courage of all the victims and their families, and I hope they're able to thrive in the rest of their lives.
So what do you think about this case? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. We read every single one of them. And if you found this story important, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime investigations that uncover the darkest secrets behind the headlines. Until next time, stay safe, look out for one another, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.